Hi, welcome back, Level 2s. So I'm hoping that you've spent some time on naming organic molecules. And as you see, remember we've talked about the meth, eth, prop, but, pent, hex, hept, and oct. And I'm hoping that you've done some of those exercises that I've given you from your workbooks as well. Okay, so today we're going to talk about naming branch chain molecules, because not all organic molecules are just in one line, because there's always some other things attached to the carbons, longer carbon molecules. So today we're going to practice naming those ones and adding it to our existing knowledge of the naming structures. Okay, so side branches are pretty much the same as naming the main chains, in the sense that these side branches, the only difference is that these ones end in "-ile". Okay, so instead of saying methane, that's the main chain for one carbon, we have, if it has a chain coming out of it that's only made up of one carbon, is a side chain. Instead of naming it like the original chain, we are going to name it with an "-ile" at the end. Okay, so for example, we've got methyl, ethyl, propyl, so all the way down to oct, and we won't ever, I don't think, go past the 5, but I just put it down there as an example. For example, if we have a molecule that looks like this, we have a molecule that has a main chain of 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons, and if we know that 4 carbons, remember, is butane, because it's the ane group. So we've got a main chain that's but, and then we have this little carbon on the end that's an added on chain, or a side chain. So that one will be, because it's only made from one carbon, it will be called a methyl group. And because we have a methyl group that's attached to the butane main chain, we need to know what carbon in the main chain is holding onto that side branch. So that's where the carbon naming comes, or the numbering comes in. And remember, we start numbering from the end that's closest to the special thing, or the thing that we are focusing on. So if we are focusing on this branch chain, we will be starting our numbering from this carbon. Okay, if it was on this one, it doesn't really matter, but as long as those numbers are the smallest possible it could be, because if we started there, that carbon would be carbon 3 methyl, and from this side, it's a 2 methyl. So we'll be naming it from the side that has this lowest number attached to that group, and that is why it's called 2 methyl butane. The first way that we can name it is, if we have a chain, we need to identify the longest possible chain. And remember, we said chain could be bent, and it doesn't really matter how it goes, as long as it's carbons that's attached to it, that counts as the chain. So we need to identify the carbons in the longest chain in this carbon. So there's branch chains going out. So let's have a look. Let's start counting and seeing where the main chain is. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if we go in that direction. Or we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is going to be my main chain. And let's put a little box around it so that we know. Might change the colour of it. So we know that is going to be our main chain, although it's not in a line, and this thing is going to be the add-on. Right, so we've got our main chain, and we know how to name our main chain because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We know it's going to be a hexane. And now, because it has a little added on group, we need to know what the name of the group is, and we need to know what carbon this new group is on. Okay, so again, thinking about naming side branches, we know there's a little side branch, and it's only made up of one carbon, so we know it's going to be called methyl. And now we have an option of either counting from this side, 1, 2, 3, so it'll be 3 methyl, or we can count from this side, 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember we said we want the carbon numbers to be the lowest, so it means in order to be the lowest, it'll be a 3. So we'll start counting from there. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3 carbons. So it's going to be 3-methyl hexane. So, and altogether, if we could name it, it's going to be 3-methyl hexane molecule. Right, so side molecules, it could be tricky sometimes because the original molecules might not be in a straight line. So as long as you can identify the longest chain, here you go again, identify the longest chain, then number the carbons so that you know where the chain is, or name it, the main chain, and then label the carbons and name the side branch, and yeah, put them all together, and that's your name for the longest carbon, or the side chain carbons. Another example could be something that looks like this. Okay, so step 1 is identify the longest chain so that we can name them as my main family. So my longest chain is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't really matter if you go that way or if you go this way, as long as it's 4. So we'll put a little block around it. And we know that 4 is butane. And then what we can see there is these 2 side chains coming out of the main family. So we've got one side chain that's made up of 1 carbon and another side chain that's made up of another carbon. So we know 1 carbon is called meth, and because they're side carbons, they're called methyl. So we're going to write that down. Methyl. But then we need to know where those methyl groups are. So we've got one on a 1, 2, and one on a 3 carbon. Well, if we start counting from there, it's still 2 and 3. Okay, so we're going to say 2, 3, and because there's 2 methyls, we need to write down that there's 2 methyls. Although we're saying it's on carbon 2 and carbon 3, we need to add something to this methyl name, and because there's 2, we call it dimethyl butane. So hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, naming the original branch, original chain is pretty easy because it has the same format if you know the names of them. The branch chain just ends with an "il" at the end, and remember you need to put a little number next to them. So I'm going to give you some exercises from your workbook as well, so you can have some practice in naming the side branches.